In 2024, the Rio Grande Valley faces its worst water crisis in living memory. Mexico owes the United States over 1.3 million acre-feet under a broken water treaty. Sections of the river have simply dried up, and South Texas agriculture stands on the edge of collapse. With reservoirs at just 18% and the deadline for delivery set to expire, $1.2 billion and thousands of livelihoods hang in the balance. How did Texas reach this breaking point, and what happens if the water never comes? The 1944 Water Treaty spells out a clear requirement. Mexico must deliver an average of 350,000 acre-feet of water each year from 6 designated tributaries, totaling 1.75 million acre-feet over every 5-year cycle. Article 4 of the treaty gives Mexico some flexibility for drought or emergencies, but the clock does not stop. As of late 2024, official ledgers from the International Boundary and Water Commission show Mexico trailing far behind. Only a fraction of the obligation, less than 450,000 acre-feet, has been delivered so far in the current cycle. That leaves a deficit of well over 1 million acre-feet, with less than a year left before the cycle's scheduled end in October 2025. This is not a routine delay. U.S. congressional delegations and Texas officials call the shortfall one of the most severe since the treaty was signed 80 years ago. In past cycles, Mexico often caught up with large last-minute releases just before the deadline. This time, the scale of the gap dwarfs previous deficits, and there is no sign of a late surge on the horizon. Treaty documents and International Boundary and Water Commission logs highlight the urgency. The United States has consistently met its own obligations on the Colorado River, while the Rio Grande ledger shows mounting arrears. The numbers are not just lines on a page. They represent water that was supposed to flow to South Texas fields, orchards, and towns. With each passing month, the deficit grows, and the promise of binational cooperation written into the treaty looks increasingly fragile. Dust hangs in the air above the Rio Grande's southernmost reaches, where the riverbed lies exposed for miles. Once a lifeline for crops and communities, the water now trickles through cracked earth or vanishes entirely, leaving only the memory of a flowing border. At Falcon Reservoir, gauges from the Texas Water Development Board show the level stuck at just 17.8% of capacity, barely a shadow of the lake it was built to be. Amistad upstream fares no better, holding less than a fifth of its designed volume. Together, these two reservoirs once stored nearly 4 million acre-feet of water. By late 2024, the combined storage struggles to break 700,000 acre-feet. Boat ramps sit high and dry, their concrete sloping into emptiness. Docks lean at odd angles, stranded far from any shoreline. In Cameron and Hidalgo counties, drone footage reveals stretches of the Rio Grande so dry that cattle paths cross the riverbed without a trace of mud. The river's absence cuts through the heart of the valley, leaving behind fields of brittle stalks and idle irrigation pipes. What was meant to be a managed system, engineered to withstand droughts, now exposes its limits. Reservoir gauges, updated daily, chart the relentless decline. Each tick downward signals another day without relief, another acre left unplanted. The landscape tells the story in stark, silent terms. Water promised by treaty and infrastructure has simply failed to arrive. The numbers on the charts are not just statistics. They are the measure of a region's vanishing future. The 1944 Water Treaty spells out a formula that shapes every drop in the valley. 6 Mexican tributaries, Conchos, San Diego, San Rodrigo, Escondido, Salado, and Las Vacas, feed the Rio Grande, with Mexico required to deliver an average of 350,000 acre-feet per year over 5-year cycles. The accounting is strict, but the river is not. Drought on both sides of the border means water that exists on paper often never reaches the reservoirs. Falcon and Amistad, engineered to store nearly 3.8 million acre-feet combined, now hold less than 700,000 acre-feet, barely enough for cities, not for farms. A hydrologist describes the problem as a mismatch between legal promises and physical reality. Reservoir curves from the Texas Water Development Board show a steady downward trend, with storage dipping below levels seen even during the 1950s drought. When storage falls this low, treaty math becomes a game of triage. Municipal supply takes priority, while agriculture is left with what remains, if anything. The system was built for abundance, but the numbers now show chronic shortage. Each update to the reservoir map is a reminder that bookkeeping rules cannot conjure water that simply is not there. Rows of citrus trees in Hidalgo County stand brown and brittle, their roots reaching for water that is not there. For growers like Maria Torres, the decision to bulldoze a 100-year-old orchard was not about hope or tradition. It was about numbers. With more than 150,000 acres of farmland sitting idle across the valley, Texas A&M economists now estimate $600 million to $800 million in lost agricultural output for 2024 alone. The ripple spreads quickly. Nearly 40,000 jobs, pickers, drivers, and mill workers hang in the balance as fields go unplanted and packing sheds shutter early. Farmers desperate to keep their operations alive have turned to groundwater, drilling deeper into the Gulf Coast and Carrizo-Wilcox aquifers. But every acre-foot pumped comes at a steep price, $200 to $500 per acre-foot, depending on depth and energy costs. Well logs from Willacy County show water tables dropping 50 to 100 feet since 2020. For some, electricity bills for irrigation now dwarf what they once paid for surface water. Land values reflect the crisis, with irrigated parcels appraising 30 to 40% lower than just a few years ago. Bankers, wary of another bad season, have begun refusing crop loans, their letters citing water risk as the reason. Environmental Council warn that as the wells run dry, endangered species lawsuits are waiting in the wings, just one more pressure point for a region already stretched to the breaking point. In northern Mexico, the drought has left entire communities in crisis. The National Water Commission, CONAGUA, issues regular bulletins saying local reservoirs in Chihuahua and Coahuila are at their lowest levels in decades. In a statement from late 2024, a CONAGUA spokesperson described the situation as a national emergency and insisted that water for Mexican cities and farms must take precedence over international deliveries. Official memos reference Article 4 of the 1944 treaty, citing the clause that allows flexibility during extraordinary drought. On the ground, the pressure is even more intense. In the farming town of Delicias, Chihuahua, protest banners hang from irrigation gates. Farmers like Juan Manuel Lopez, a cooperative leader, organize marches and road blockades to stop any release of water from the Conchos River system. Lopez says sending water north would leave his community without enough for crops or drinking. Local radio plays heated interviews with farmers who accuse federal officials of sacrificing their livelihoods for a treaty they call unfair during times of scarcity. These protests have stalled planned water releases, and some incidents have escalated to confrontations with federal police. For many in northern Mexico, the crisis is not just about international obligations. It is about survival. Every decision made in Mexico City or Washington reverberates through towns where water is measured in days, not acre-feet. Governor Abbott's strategy has grown more forceful as the water crisis deepens. In a series of public statements and letters to Washington, Texas leaders have demanded that the federal government take a harder line with Mexico. Congressional delegations from both chambers have pressed the White House and the State Department to enforce the 1944 Water Treaty, warning that inaction could devastate the Rio Grande Valley's $1.2 billion farm economy. The most recent letter, signed by more than 40 Texas lawmakers, points to a shortfall of over 1 million acre-feet and calls for immediate diplomatic action. Meanwhile, the International Boundary and Water Commission, the binational agency charged with overseeing treaty compliance, finds itself with little real power. The International Boundary and Water Commission can keep records and broker meetings, but it cannot compel Mexico to release water or impose penalties for non-compliance. As the deficit grows and pressure mounts, the limits of both state and federal authority have become painfully clear. City water managers in McAllen and Brownsville now face a 30-day window to secure backup supplies and finalize emergency protocols. With Falcon and Amistad reservoirs hovering near 15 to 20% capacity, municipal risk thresholds are being tested. Legal teams have drafted contingency orders to prioritize hospitals and critical infrastructure if levels dip further. Industrial demand charts show SpaceX's Starbase drawing allocations that rival entire neighborhoods, intensifying public debate over who gets cut first. Environmental Council warned that ongoing endangered species litigation could force even stricter restrictions if river flows drop below minimum habitat thresholds. Policy toolkits on the table include expedited interconnections with neighboring utilities, fast-track funding applications for groundwater wells, and temporary desalination contracts. Municipalities have been given a 30-day deadline to submit revised drought contingency plans with state emergency funds contingent on compliance. Failure to act within this window could trigger mandatory rationing and expose cities to legal and environmental penalties. Today, fields that once fed millions stand dry as water politics collide with a changing climate. The Rio Grande's fate now shapes the border's economy, ecology, and diplomacy in real time. What happens next will test how nations and neighbors share what can no longer be taken for granted.